Hey class, today we're going to solve a quadratic equation using the quadratic formula. So what I decided, since there's so much information that I want to pass on to you, I went ahead and broke this video into two parts. So the very first part, we're going to go ahead and look at the quadratic formula. And the quadratic formula looks like this. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. In order to use the quadratic formula, you need to make sure that your quadratic equation is in standard form. When you're in standard form, you can then use a, the value of a, b, and c to plug into your formula and find your solutions. Now, before you do that, what I would like you to do is use what's called the discriminant first before you solve. The discriminant is basically this portion underneath the radical. That's the discriminant. So before you do the entire formula, I want you to calculate this value under here first for all of your problems. So here are the rules. If the discriminant is greater than 0, then two distinct real number solutions exist. Okay? Two distinct real number solutions. For example, x equals 4, just as an example, and x equals negative 2. That would be two distinct real solutions. Now, if your discriminant is equal to 0, then there's a repeated real number solution. Which means, for example, since it's repeated, let's say we had x equals 2 as one solution, the other solution would also be x equals 2. Notice the solutions are the same. That's when the discriminant is equal to 0. And then finally, we have if the discriminant is less than 0, then neither of the two solutions are real. So that would take us to a complex number. Since the discriminant would be negative, we would have a complex solution, or complex solutions, if you will. So for example, maybe you would have 5 plus I and 5 minus I. So just by looking at the discriminant, we can determine what kind of solutions we have. And also by looking at the number. If it's positive, two distinct real solutions. If it's equal to 0, it's a repeated real solution. If it's less than 0, complex solutions. Okay, let's go ahead and look at an example together. Okay, so first thing you want to do, and I'll write this here for T-Ravis, is make sure you're in standard form. And sure enough, we're in standard form. The second thing you want to do here is identify your A value, your B value, and your C value. So here we have an A value of -1, a B value of 2, and a C value of -8. Recall the key feature here, our y-intercept, 0, -8. Third, we're going to go ahead and substitute those values into the discriminant. Sub values into discriminant. So we have, plugging 2 into B, we have 2 squared minus 4 times A, which is -1, times C, which is -8. So substituting the values into the discriminant, the next step is to evaluate. So to evaluate, we're going to go ahead and do the math. 2 squared is 4. And then here, this always kind of confuses students. Well, if you count the negatives, 1, 2, 3, if it's odd, it's going to be minus. 4 times 1 is 4. 4 times 8 is 32. Remember, if there's an even number of negatives, then it would be positive. So continuing on, we get 4 minus 32. Okay, now continuing on, 4 minus 32 gives us -28. So our discriminant is less than 0. So we're going to have complex solutions. So that's the first thing I want you guys to do, is determine the type of solutions we're going to get. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and plug this into our quadratic formula. So x equals -b, so we're going to substitute in the 2 in for b, plus or minus the square root, and we've already calculated the discriminant, so we're going to input the number there, divided by 2 times a, which is -1. Okay, continuing on, we have -1 times 2, which is -2, plus or minus. We need to simplify this radical, so we're going to have -1 for that negative times 4 times 7. And that's going to be over -2. So just like we've been doing in our warm-ups at this point. So we have -2 plus or minus the square root of 4, which is 2, the square root of -1, which is I, and then our radical 7 goes on the end, all over -2. We're then going to go ahead and break this into 2 fractions, so we're going to divide the first term by -2. We'll do the plus first. And our second answer, we will be utilizing the minus for the second answer. Alright, so simplifying, we get 1. 2 divided by -2 is -1, so we're going to do minus I radical 7. Second answer, again, we get a 1. 2 divided by negative 2 is negative 1. So when you subtract a negative, that becomes positive I radical 7. So up here, the discriminant helps us calculate what type of solutions we have. They're going to be complex solutions. And then using the quadratic formula, plugging in the values, plugging in the discriminant, plugging in B, plugging in A, we can go ahead and simplify this to get the two solutions. Okay, this ends part 1. Tomorrow night, we'll do part 2.